Welcome, colleagues. While we wait for everyone to join us, I would always welcome hearing who's in the room and where you're from. So please use that chat just to introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from while we wait for others to join. Welcome, everyone. As we slowly allow colleagues into the meeting room, I would so love to know who's in the room. So please feel free to add your names and where you're from in the chat. We'll just wait another minute or two. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we're going to start now. We've got people joining as we go along, and everyone introducing themselves in the chat. But I think in the interest of time, let us start with our webinar. Welcome to everyone. My name is Elizabeth Girdwood, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar on the determinants of school readiness in South African preschoolers. This is the first time you've heard from me this year, and I'm absolutely delighted to be facilitating this webinar. A few short weeks ago, on the 25th of March, DataDrive 2030 released the Thrive by 5 Index 2024's dataset, hosted via Data First at the University of Cape Town, alongside a 6-paper working series and webinar. Ahead of this public release, DataDrive 2030 had invited a small group of researchers to work with the data in depth. Their sustained engagement forms the foundation of the working paper series, and it offers concrete examples of how the dataset can be interrogated rigorously. Dr. Soltanlou's paper was one of these 6 presentations. His fascinating study examines the determinants of school readiness among South African preschoolers, focusing on early numeracy and literacy skills. And we are grateful to have more time available to us today to hear about the study and its findings. So we welcome you today, almost 200 of you, and we look forward to hearing your voices as we engage with the key findings of this research paper. As you know, we use a fairly standard format across every webinar. Dr. Soltanlou's presentation will take 35 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for a 20-minute discussion and fielding of questions. And there is some housekeeping always before we start. We're recording the session, and everyone should please keep their microphones and cameras off to avoid interruptions. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so post your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. You can raise your hands as well, and I may ask you to ask your question directly when the time comes. But please be precise and respectful of our limited time. The technical team, who have all lost their voices at the moment, will manage your muting and unmuting. The presentation and recording will be shared after the webinar, so keep an eye out on our socials, both Ilifa Labantwana and DataDrive 2030 socials. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Mojtaba Soltanlou. Mojtaba is an assistant professor of developmental cognitive neuroscience and the director of the Learning Brain Lab at UCL in the UK. He's also a senior associate researcher at the University of Johannesburg. His research focuses on mathematics learning and development and on school readiness in typically and atypically developing children in different countries, including South Africa. He studied occupational therapy for an undergraduate and master's degrees in Iran, and he's worked with children with developmental and learning disorders for 7 years. He then completed his PhD and his first postdoc in neuroscience in Germany, followed by a second postdoc in Canada, before moving over to the UK. Over to you, Dr. Soltanlou.
Thank you so much, Liz, for the introduction and this opportunity. I'm so pleased to be here with everyone to discuss some of our findings. I'm going to share the slides. Hopefully you can see them now. Excellent. Okay. Good. So, hello again. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's always great to share our findings with academics and also non-academic colleagues, including practitioners, teachers, and hopefully in our audience today, we would have those colleagues who will be the kind of end user of what we are trying to provide, or the knowledge or understanding that we try to provide through those studies. I think Liz already generously introduced myself. So I am currently in academia, but before that I was an occupational therapist. I did a lot of hands-on practices with children with a variety of difficulties. So I highlighted that because when it comes to the findings, I may sometimes put my occupational therapy hat on and give a few advice, evidence-based advice, of course, for some of those predictors or factors that we highlight in this study. All right, with that, I go to start. Before digging into the findings, I would like to first introduce a little bit our lab or cognition lab at the University of Johannesburg, which was led by Professor Elizabeth Henning. She was the chair of primary school education in language, math, and science in South Africa, and I had the privilege working with her and her team since 2021. We had a lot of studies. We have done actually completed a lot of studies. Some of them you can see here. We did some longitudinal studies in primary school or preschool children about understanding and development of mathematics. We have done some cross-cultural studies of mathematical development between South Africa and the UK that I will refer some of the findings later on. And in addition to those behavioral studies, we have done some neuroimaging studies as well using this device, which is called FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy, which is one of the most child-friendly devices that allows us to look into the brain to see what's going on or what is not going on in the brain when children or altogether individuals learn something or they struggle with learning something. And these are some of the photos of the lovely colleagues there at the UJ. All right, let's start with the topic of today, numeracy and literacy. So why these two and not other skills? It of course depends on the way that we look at those skills. The way that we look at them is that numeracy and literacy are kind of gate keepers or gateways, let's say, to school learning. What do we mean by that? We mean that we need a lot of skills, right, at the school entry. However, we may struggle with some of them to some extent, but what we should definitely know is these two skills. which means that we need to be numerate, we need to be literate to be able to learn anything at school. Doesn't mean that we don't need other skills, but the other skills to us seem more basics that we go later on to. So we need to get all those skills together to develop these two gateway, let's say, skills to be ready to go to school. That's one of the main reasons that we looked at numeracy and literacy as the outcome variables here for us. And also, we need to, maybe we don't really need to highlight the age of AI, artificial intelligence, which is going to be everywhere. So within this age, with all those very fast changes, I think we need to be literate and numerate. And the more specific to South Africa is that based on international surveys, unfortunately, South Africa is not doing that well in those surveys. Let's look at two of them. So for numeracy, TIMSS is one of the most established international surveys that has shown, unfortunately, less than 20% of children in fifth grade, in primary school, fifth graders and ninth graders, they attended this international survey. Less than 20% of them are performing at the level that they are supposed to. This is a very low performance or low achievement, let's say. So over 80% of them are behind what they are being taught. The case of literacy is the same. So again, PILS, another international survey that where South Africa contributed to, showed again below 20% of children in grade 5 are reading and understanding what they are reading. And as you see, unfortunately, within that scale, South Africa is among the very last ones. So these are some examples that highlight the need of the country to work towards those skills. And there was a very interesting article last year by Rachel in Guardian that highlighted those needs. And I like the title saying, if you don't get it early, get early years right regarding the education and training for children, children are unlikely to catch up, which seems to be the picture in South Africa. So that's the main reason that we thought that, okay, let's go down to preschool age, which is very critical for developing knowledge and understanding to be ready for schools. And we had this privilege of having access to Tribe by 5 data set, which is an amazing data set, and do some studies there. Okay, let's look at our research question. We had a very simple research question. We ask ourselves, what are the factors that would determine the school readiness that we define here as being ready or being on track for numeracy and literacy in South Africa? So which factors at different levels would contribute to the readiness at the school entry for South African children? There are different theories and models. One of the most established ones is Bronfen Brenner's social ecological model, that you may have heard of that or may have worked towards that. This model has different layers. So this is one visualization that I borrowed from Levante web page. So based on this model, different factors at different levels would contribute to education and learning of individuals. So those factors, there's a huge list. I'm not going to read all of them, but what is important here is to look at those layers. At the child level, at home and family level, At the school or preschool, you see the whatever educational setting that the child is attending, and then on top of everything is the community level. And this specific study, we looked at these three layers. A child level that would highlight the individual capacities of the child by itself, by himself, herself. Home or family level, which provides the learning environment for the child to flourish, and the school, not the community level. So we looked at these three levels. And the school is, of course, the learning programs that are kind of artificially introduced to the societies, to our society as human being. So we look at these three levels to see how much each of those levels and different predictors or factors within each of those levels would contribute to understanding or readiness of numeracy and literacy in children in South Africa. I will not spend too much on the data set. You may have heard of that, but the full report very nicely presented online and offline, so you can get to know more about this data set. But very briefly, it is maybe the most representative data of the country of South Africa in early years. That includes over 5,000 children. Here we report data of 5,001 children. And it's quite representative, has been collected from over 1,300 of early learning programs with a lot of interviews with caregivers, school principals, and so on, and with thousands of visits. So it was a huge work, and I would like to congratulate the team, Data Drive, for doing that great work. So, how did we look at data? I thought I need to briefly mention about the analytical approach that when it comes to the findings, we could interpret them together much easier. So we used a method which is called mixed multivariate logistic regression model. In this model, we put the variables, all the predictors to the model, and the model will tell us based on by including all those variables, whether each of those predictors would contribute to the child numeracy and literacy in a sense of being on track, which means doing good, or not being on track. So I will give now some examples here. What is important is that for each of those predictors, the model will tell us some odds ratio or OR, which determines something is happening versus not happening. In this case, being on track or doing good, or not being on track, not necessarily doing good, or being behind the peers. And for each of those predictors, the model will adjust or control for the other variables. Okay, so it would not look at them independently. Why is that important? It's important because two predictors might contribute at the same time to, let's say, numeracy, right? But those two factors may significantly overlap with each other. So if we look at each of them independently, we would say, well, yeah, factor one is an important one. Factor two is also important. But when we put them together, we control for one and look at one another, we see that maybe only factor one is an important predictor. Factor two had a lot of overshared with factor one, which we already consider. So factor two is not a predictor anymore. So it loses in the competition in this model kind of to be a significant predictor. So that's the way that the model helps us to determine the unique contribution of the predictors. Because of that, it's a kind of advanced model that provides a lot of good information for us. So how do we look, or how do we translate those odds ratios or OR? We can look at them as the probability. It doesn't exactly mean probability, but it's a kind of proxy for. So here is simple formula. We don't need to go through, and do a lot of calculation to understand the probability. But the way that we can look is that, for example, age has odds ratio of 1. What does that mean? Using this formula, it will be 1 over 1 plus 1, which is 1 over 2, which is half, and then multiplied by 100 is like 50%, which is 50-50. So if the output, or OR, or the odd ratio of the model is 1, it means the chance of being on track or not being on track is 50-50. Right? So this means age would not have any effect, right? But just imagine that the OR of the age is 3. Then 3 over 3 plus 1 is 75%. If the chance is 50%, then it will tell us the age would have a significant contribution to predictability of being on track, which means being older, I would have the 75% chance of being on track and only 25% of not being on track. So this is a huge, huge prediction indeed. This is the way that we can look at data. So we don't really need to transform any of those, but when I explain some of the findings, having this in back of our head would maybe help. Okay, let's have a look at the findings then. What did we find? So first, let's start with this highlight on the top right, that by putting all those predictors, you see it's a huge list of the predictors. We could predict 25% of being on track for numeracy. This means, and this is a huge, huge percentage. So and now we go through those variables. So by looking at those variables, we can, or by doing intervention, for example, about those, we can improve the chance of a child for being on track or being ready for school regarding numeracy by 25%, 26%, which is a huge, huge contribution for us. So let's have a look at those predictors. What was important for numeracy? Those that are significantly contributing, we made them bold. As you see, the first one is gross motor development. What is gross motor development? Gross motor is all those abilities that we do with large muscles and large joints of the body, like running, jumping, walking, all those. The second one, which was important, and I go through kind of details of each later on, but I'm just trying to introduce them for now here. The second one is fine motor coordination, which mainly relates to fingers, what we do with our fingers, and visual motor integration, which is about eye-hand coordination, which is essential. The next factor, which was actually the most important predictor, was cognitive skills, like my attention span, my working memory, or the ability to shift between what the teacher is saying and what I'm doing, all those cognitive abilities. The next predictor was task attention, which relates to the amount of attention that the child, or the engagement that the child had during the testing. The next one was emotion readiness, or the ability to regulate my emotion, or emotion maturation, or emotion regulation. All those construct or skills have been integrated into this readiness. And the last one, which was, you see, this is the odd of one. Everything must be above. So these are all above, above, above. But this one is below, which was surprise. I will cover that. It's about relationship and interaction of the child within the school, which is about the relationship with the teacher and with the peers. Going to literacy, the picture was kind of very similar regarding those factors at the child level. But in addition, we had sex. So girls have been doing better, and age was important. So older children did better. And the other factor, which was not showing up for numeracy, was planning and assessment within the preschool, right? So the way that the curriculum was designed and assessed was a good predictor of the performance in literacy. By putting them together, you see a huge overlap here at the child level with some differences. For literacy, for example, we had sex and age, but not for numeracy. Gross motor was a predictor for numeracy, but not for literacy. When we come to home and family, actually, there is almost nothing. There's no contribution. None of those variables contributed to children's readiness. And when we go to school or ECD centers, planning was a good predictor of literacy, but relationship was a bad predictor of being on track. Let's dig a little bit into those predictors. The first one was, I'm going through that list that I just showed you one by one. About the sex, well, being like girls have been more on track for literacy than boys, but there was no gender difference in the case of numeracy. This is not necessarily a surprise that we know globally. There are a lot of literature saying that at the young age, girls develop their language ability, which heavily associate with literacy development. They develop faster than boys. So, and apparently this is the critical age of 4 to 5 years. And so we should not be necessarily surprised that girls did better or have been, not necessarily did better because we did not compare necessarily, but have been more on track for literacy than boys. The next factor was age. So apparently what we expect is that if children, they get older, they develop more knowledge, right? So they become better in any sort of knowledge. But we were surprised that this was only the case of literacy, not numeracy. We could conclude a few things. The first thing is it's quite a sensitive age. So this age of 4 to 5 is the age that we develop a lot of things, a lot of skills and abilities. And we have to consider it very seriously. However, there's a huge difference between these two as well, between literacy and numeracy, because in this critical age, about 53 of children have been on track for literacy, but only 33 have been on track for numeracy. That gap also would highlight something, which is the average age, but nevertheless, that would highlight that there is more missing for numeracy than literacy. One argument might be that literacy developed more naturally through the conversation, communication, correcting of the child, and all those feedbacks that we have, while numeracy is more artificial and it needs more like direct training or direct teaching to the child. Although we do have number talks, when for example adults with children, they communicate, they use numbers, but when you consider that compared to general speaking or literacy, the amount is much lower. Also, what I would like to highlight here is that one of our studies that I mentioned earlier was a cross-cultural study between British kids and South African kids. What we observed, and there we did a huge battery of mathematical tests. And what was quite shocking that as I said, we expect that when children get older, even within one year, from age of 4 to 5, we usually see that the performance improves. So older children perform better than younger. This is not a surprise. But when we looked at the picture of the South African children, there was no age effect. What does that mean? It meant that South African children, it seems that they are kind of missing that window, which is quite important. So children at the age of 5 did not perform better than 4.5, did not perform better than 4-year-old children, and so on. So this is the age effect that we expected to see, but was completely missing in South African children. So this is important window, but unfortunately we are missing, especially in the case of numeracy. The factor which was a predictor for numeracy but not literacy was gross motor development. There are a couple of theories about the sensory motor perspective and embodied cognition, they are called. They say those theories, they say, and there are a couple of evidence for that as well. If I know my body better, I would develop abstract thinking or cognition much better. It also suggests that understanding the numbers is not a pure abstract symbol understanding of the symbols, but it relates to magnitudes or objectives as well. So it's not all about abstract concepts. So those theories, for example, would say using our body, we can develop more understanding of magnitudes. Magnitudes such as higher, lower, forward, backward, left, right, heavier, lighter, all those. And those magnitude and numbers are a part of those magnitudes. There are some theories saying numbers are part of those magnitude systems. So if you work towards those magnitudes, number understanding would improve as well. So based on those theories, I think we can interpret the role of gross motor development for numeracy. The other one is fine motor coordination and visual motor integration. This is actually quite important. There are, again, a lot of studies showing using fingers or finger counting, for example, how influential it would be. And it's also very necessary for drawing, writing symbols, and all those abilities and those skills. So again, there's a huge literature behind that if we encourage children to use more their fingers, we can contribute to their both literacy and numeracy skills as well. So those activities at the ECDs could be very influential. Cognitive skills were actually the most important or the most significant predictors. Again, we do have a lot of literature showing that if I attend well, I gain more. If I have better memory, I can keep more information in my mind. If I can control my impulses, not being so impulsive and being distracted, then I can perform better, which means I can gain more from what my teacher is telling me. And there are some groups. One of them that I recently got to know was the Trust, I guess, led by Andrew Raj in South Africa, that are doing a lot of good interventions for cognitive and executive function development in preschools. The other one is emotional readiness or emotional regulation, the ability which was important for both literacy and numeracy. So if emotionally I feel more secure, I express myself and contribute more to the school, and then I receive more feedback. So that helps me to better understand the things and improve. And again, that helps a lot of other cognitive abilities as well, because I can regulate myself, I can sit down, I can receive more. So the role of emotion, again, especially in the case of emotion regulation, has been highlighted for learning in young children as well. The other one, which was more related to the testing situation, was the task attention. Which is related to the communication between examiner, and this is kind of generic findings. So if the child collaborates more, if they attend more, if they are being more motivated to communicate, then they perform better. It also, to some extent, overlaps with two main other skills. One was cognitive skills. So I must have developed that ability, right, in my cognition to be able to attend to the task that you are asking me to do. And also, I must have developed kind of my emotion regulation to regulate my emotion to be able to go through that path during the assessment. One other factor which is related to the school was curriculum planning and assessment, which was influential for literacy, but not numeracy. It highlights that the structure, the curriculum planning that we have currently in South Africa is kind of influential. There's always room to improve, but it's influential for literacy. But maybe we need to think a little bit more about our planning and assessment for numeracy. So which this was not really influential. So children did not gain enough in the ECDs regarding the mathematical understanding and number understanding. And this one is the surprise that kind of contradicts the findings of the literature. In the literature, we know that if the communication between the teacher and the child is good, usually the performance or the gain is higher. But however, here, this predictor included the interaction with children. One speculation that we have here is it may refer to good friendship. So I'm very good with my buddy who is sitting beside me, but I may distract him or her, and not necessarily letting them or letting myself to learn. So that might be one reason. So my great relationship with my buddy doesn't necessarily lead to that. But of course, there are literature showing opposite as well. So this is not something that we can explain that much. But what about home and families? So home and families, as I said, unfortunately, none of them was a predictor. So maybe this is a little bit too harsh saying they are not influential, but they are kind of not influential. So looking at some reports by UNESCO, for example, about 70% of South African parents stated that they are worried about their contribution in their children's development. So it seems that there is a kind of maybe awareness to some extent that they know that they are not really contributing. At the same time, when we look at this data set, most of parents, they overestimated their children's performance. So that might be due to different reasons. Maybe I'm not getting that enough engaged with my child, so I don't really have a good understanding of their skills. Or maybe I'm just waiting, I'm relying entirely on the ECDs to see if there is any complaint, then I get involved. But as long as there is no direct complaint about my child, maybe I just assume that they are doing well. But nevertheless, what does that highlight? It highlights that we need to increase the awareness of the families about their potential role in training in young age, and also provide some training that could be through social media, could be through evening gatherings, or the time that we could allocate within the ECD centers for them to increase their awareness and giving them some hints that, okay, now you know how what to do, we should tell you how to do that as well. So to provide that the knowledge to some extent as well. And about the ECDs, they had marginally influential, not too much, honestly. Again, looking at UNESCO report, unfortunately in South Africa, there is not a good alignment between the curriculum, textbook, teacher guide, and assessment. They are not being well aligned and integrated. So what we are planning is slightly different from what is expected, from slightly different from what is being tested. So they are not well aligned. This is an area that maybe expert needs to work towards. And of course, we need more evidence like try by five. And what we can definitely suggest based on the current data in hand is that we need to provide regular low cost, like asynchronous training, all those records that they can go and learn, practice, and gain knowledge based on their own pace for practitioners and the assessment. But this is definitely another area that we need to work towards to increase the chance of the child to flourish and being on track. A few notes before closing is the first point is that this data is cross-sectional. We have to be careful. It's not a longitudinal data. What does that mean? It means that we assume, based on theories, that some of those skills are predictors of some others, right? But nevertheless, they all have been collected at the same time, not earlier, not later. The other point is about the analysis approach. So we looked at the outcome variables for us was binary, which means being either on track or not on track. It has several strengths, but some weaknesses as well. So one weakness of the model is that we kind of ignore the variance or individual differences within it. So you might be on track with this score of, let's say, 95 out of 100. I might be on track with only score of 65. But nevertheless, we both have been have been put in the same category. So this is another issue. And also, most of our knowledge, I have to highlight this, that most of our knowledge comes from weird population or context. Weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. So we borrow, and which builds the minority word, actually. And we get those knowledge and we extend, we use for our societies, for defining the milestones, curriculum, everything. So we need to localize. And one of the good things about Thrive by Five was that the main measures was based on ILM, which is a localized South African test. Okay, well, with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Of course, it was not my work, it was a teamwork, and I just presented on behalf of the team, which included Dr. Parvin Nemati, Dr. Gabriella Garan-Carrier in Canada. Dr. Parvin Nemati was a postdoc at the University of Johannesburg. Gabriella is an assistant professor in Canada, Sherbrooke University. Annie was the statistician of the team, have done most of the job, and of course co-leadership of Professor Elizabeth Henning at the UJ. Thank you so much for your attention. I put my email, and you can simply also find me on LinkedIn if you want to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mojtaba. Getting children ready for school is clearly not about one single thing, but about like building a strong foundation across many areas of development. The Q&A box is exploding gently, so I think we would be. I wondered if I will just read some questions out quickly, and if you can just, I'm going to read one. If you can just answer, and we can go like that, and then we may have time to ask people to ask their questions. We got a question about the actual data analysis. How did you prioritize the important variables in bold? Right at the very beginning of your presentation. And similarly, Adia Lillenstein has asked, did you run any checks for multicollinearity? Having so many predictors may introduce this.
Yeah, so we introduced all of them at the same time to the model. Those that I highlighted and how we selected them from, they kind of cover most of the variables that literature have shown in the past that might influence. So this is the way that we selected them, and those that I highlighted were only those that were significant predictors. We did not select them; the model selected them. Because they contributed significantly. And collinearity is being treated in that multivariate model. So it's not a prerequisite because the model will take care of that. It will subtract out actually the shear variance and shows the unique variance or contribution of each predictor, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mojtaba. We got a question from Chantel Witten about the findings around the home and the family. Like, what does parenting stimulation mean? What does parenting involvement in child activities mean? Does it relate to specific activities or the frequency of engagement? Essentially what that means for parenting programs.
Actually, both of them that you that you name. So the first thing is how stimulating or how we have the concept of home math activities and home literacy activities as well. So those are the activities that contribute through the activities. Could be a game, could be a chat, could be a talk, could be any sort of activities or communication that parents have with their children during the day. That would directly or indirectly through other mechanisms would help them to improve their mathematical and reading, or let's call literacy and numeracy understanding. So, and it's not only about that, it's also, as you said, about the frequency of that. I may do those, once per month, but you do every day number talk with your child. Of course, that frequency plays another role as well.
Thank you. Dorette Lowe has got another question, also similarly around the home and family findings, because it seems contradictory to the findings from the Thrive by 5 index that found that having access to books in the home showed a strong positive association with the total ELOM score.
Yeah.
Could you shed some light on the seeming contradiction?
Yeah, that's a good point. So let me give you a picture of the data. So about 11% only of the parents reported having more than 5 child books at home. It's quite low. So about 89-90% of them, they don't really have books for the children. About 1/3 of them reported kind of 0 books for children in home. So this shows the amount of the engagement. So if actually this is one of the most common materials that I may have at home to do some literacy or numeracy related activities with my child, if about 35% of parents have nothing at home, so probably we could expect this. But at the same time, what is important is to some extent having books is a proxy, or education or income are the proxies of the socioeconomic status. Again, because our model was multivariate, these predictors none of them was significant predictor of the performance. But we have conducted univariate analysis as well. What is univariate? Univariate is to consider each one of those predictors independently. And when we do univariate analysis, those factors are significant predictors. So the difference with the main report is that in the main report, they probably have looked individually, right? If we individually, for example, look at socioeconomic status on numeracy, It's a very important predictor. But when we control in our model for with multivariate for other variables, this is not being that much important.
Thank you. That's great. We've got a couple of hands, and one of them, Beverly Chetty, has had her hand up for a long time. So I think, Beverly, could you ask your question directly? Beverly, you are muted. Go ahead. Otherwise, Adelaide Mkumazi, you've also had been asked with your hand up for a while. Okay, let's move on, but let's go back to the Q&A box while we wait for that. Emily O'Ryan has an interesting question, and it's regarding the safe and conducive educational infrastructure. Is there anything to be said regarding the impact of adequate educational infrastructure and safety on the learner readiness and success?
Do we distinguish between educational and safety? Kind of, right? So here we did not include any safety measures, though I think in the data there is a lot of information or predictors of the building of the access to X, Y, Z, and safety. That might be, but we did not necessarily look into the safety. But I could imagine that, safety will, even if not directly, might indirectly affect my um, emotion readiness, that I feel safe. And if I feel safe, probably I can use my resources, including my memory of working memory. We have some theories or some models about math anxiety, that anxiety will occupy a part of my working memory. It doesn't allow the entire capacity to be used by anything that I'm learning. So only a part of that is available, not the entire. So through that might influence.
Okay. Well, Cabo has got a very good question here about the multilingual nature of South Africa. And I would really like you to answer that, ask your question directly, Bukabo. So I wondered if the technical team could please unmute, and they could ask the question directly. Go for it. You're unmuted. Okay, I'll ask it anyway. Um, they're looking at, is there any comparable data that looks at the multilingual nature of the South African context and whether it contributes to South African children being more on track with literacy versus numeracy? Also, why does this not translate to reading with meaning in later school years?
Um, it it may. So in our data, we did not find it to be a predictor. So multilingualism or knowing more or one language versus more than one language was not necessarily a predictor of literacy or numeracy in this data set when we did the multivariate analysis. But I would say to some extent it might, because for example, I want to refer to one of our recent papers that it was a brain imaging paper that we published recently, where we show in first graders, if they process numbers in their home language versus English, they rely heavily still on some cognitive resources which are supplementary for number processing or mathematics. What does that mean? What the message of that paper was that look, children are not really ready, and the pattern is a little bit more complex because for South African children, for the majority of them, English number of words are their first number language because they know numbers in English much better than their home language. So the pattern is a kind of cross, right? So for speaking, they rely mainly on their home language. But when it comes to numbers, they switch to English because they prefer, because they started learning number system in English. So English, so that would make it a little bit more complex for them. And in that paper, we show that, kids are not as ready as we think in grade one regarding, and that's the effect of multilingualism. But in our data, we could not find that much in younger children because they are like 2 years on average younger than the other sample that I mentioned. And this is very critical age.
Okay, thank you, Mojtaba. Louis Benjamin's also got a question, and then I'm going to ask Adia to also ask her questions after that. But we've got another 4 minutes. So, Louis, over to you. Could you be brief?
Hi, how's it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to repeat my question. I wrote it in a rush. You just seemed a little surprised or taken aback about the 4 or 5 year old age effect. So I was wondering what you think about that. That is very strange. And do you think it requires further investigation? Because I suppose we would assume that there's developmental maturation happening in children. Or do you think it's got something to do with the study or the research? I don't know if that's clear.
You mean the age effect for numeracy,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We do have a lot of maturation, right? So if we, especially for example, if we look at executive function and cognition, yes, of course, we expect that. But let's look at numeracy. Numeracy is, or dealing with numbers, is a kind of artificially created by us, by humans, right? So, and it's kind of rather new kind of development or new creation by us. It doesn't go to 1,000 years ago. So even the network in the brain are rather new. So if we look at neural recycling theory or model by Stan DeHaan, we see that those mathematical number network is built on other systems. So coming back to your point, there should be a lot of maturation, and there is a lot of maturation, but at the same time, that maturation needs a kind of to be fed, if that makes sense. But children are not being enough fed or trained for number processing. Again, our preprint of the cross-cultural data is available if you would like to have a look. There we have a lot of plots showing, that it's almost flat when you look at children in South Africa about the performance, and we use 6 different basic numerical tasks. And we show in almost all of them the flat, it's almost flat. But when we look at British children, it's quite steep. So it seems that they are ready, brain is ready to get it, but there are not enough food for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That does make sense. Um, I was just also thinking because it's at such a foundational level where there are no big foundational mathematical. I mean, they're all related to mostly, I'd assume, cognitive development at this stage and the cognitive components that are going to help to create those foundational understandings. So yeah, and I think I do link to your explanation that maybe it's got a lot to do with the environmental circumstances. So thanks.
Exactly,
Sorry,
because
yeah,
children are, as you say, cognitively ready. But if we look again at home, like I'm cognitively ready, but I go home, there's almost no book,
yeah,
right? For example, this is just an example. Well, the environment is not rich regarding the resources enough.
yeah,
So my cognitive ability doesn't lead that much to anywhere
yeah. No,
regarding
thank you.
numeracy, I would say.
Thanks very
I'm going
much.
to have to interject. I'm so sorry, because we're coming to the last few seconds of our webinar time with everyone today, and we haven't managed to field all the questions. There are lots of them, but you can download Dr. Soltanlou's working paper using that link in the chat. And there are also some excellent research briefs available on the Data Drive 2030 website. I would just like to end by thanking Dr. Soltanlou for his incredible presentation. It really has been food for thought. You can all look out for our next webinar on the 6th of May by Lerato Shai, which is entitled Carrying the System, Women's Invisible Burden in South Africa's Childcare Model. But thank you to everyone for your active participation, and see you again very soon.
Thank you so much. Have a good day,
Thank
everyone.
you.